This podcast is sponsored by Inside Out Group, the specialists in high-risk and challenging filming and time-lapse, covering health and safety videos for rail, construction, and infrastructure projects nationwide.
And we're live. Welcome to this week's Safer Than Your Average. On the show this week we have Dave. Dave, if you just want to come in and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, how's it going, mate? And yeah, thanks for having me. Feel quite privileged actually. You've been on here, but Dave White. I currently work for Morgan Sindall Rail and part of the infrastructure group. And just for coming on here, I'm really chuffed to share my sort of analogies and stories, Blair. So thanks for having me, mate.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Dave. So I don't know if you've seen the format of the podcast. We like to just go right back to the beginning. Tell us a little bit about your early life, where you grew up.
Okay, mate. I'll start off, as you can tell probably by my accent. I'm born in a place called Bannockburn, which is in Scotland. And if people don't know where that is, I can just mention a famous battle in 1314 maybe, to jog some memories. But yeah, near Stirling, in Scotland. And from a very early age, I would say, I was dragged up, as I used to say to people. It's quite a bit of an upbringing that I had, but not necessarily involved in school. I didn't really pay much attention. I loved my football. Loved to play football. I was on YTS with Dunfermline Athletic at the time. Again, looking back, if you look at the sort of facilities not available to kids nowadays compared to what we had, we just tipped up, done a bit of training, was told to go away again, clean the changing rooms and brush the changing rooms and all that sort of stuff, and I got paid £6.75 a week, which I thought was fantastic at the time. You're playing football. But sadly, it came to an end. Two things. One was a leg break. I broke my leg playing for a boys' club team, when I was still playing with Dunfermline as well. And also, it's quite difficult when you break the leg. The manager of the team turns around and says, "Well, actually, mate, we were going to tell you next week anyway that you weren't good enough, so we're going to let you go," type scenario. So, yeah, a bit of a blow I was 15 at the time, a bit of a blow. I was one of them as well, where I thought, yeah, I'll be all right. I'll just pick up where I left off once I've got my leg done and that. Life happens. And it was at that time, probably decided to screw the nut a little bit in school. I was lucky enough to come away with 7 GCSEs I got in school. It isn't too bad, considering I didn't study that much and just get on with it. So there was an analogy then. When I left school, I was 16. My mum had said to me at the end of the day, I either go and do A levels or I go and find a job. And at 16 sounds a bit strange, but that's how it was back then. And I was saying I'm never going to go back to school, so I'm going to go and get a job, which try to find apprenticeships and various other stuff. And I had two of my brothers were in the army at the time. One was Argyll Silver Highlanders, the other one was in the Regiment. And I can remember when they joined thinking, I've never been me. You do look up to your brothers at the end of the day, but at the same time, I was like, nah, I was too much of a lad at the time, if you know what I mean. But yeah, I thought nothing of it. And I remember going into town one day to an old job hunt, and I walked past the Army Careers office and went in. I just had a nosy around, and I came home with £16.75 in my back pocket, having sworn the oath of allegiance to the Queen. Basically, then 16 and a half, I joined a thing called the Junior Leaders Regiment, which was at the time you couldn't join the man's army, as they called it. I was only a kid. So we sent me down to Bovington, and that was on the 4th. Actually, it was 29 years yesterday. I went down there for a year. So it was a year's training, 16 and a half. And it was probably, looking back, one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. It was from the journey I had from the start all the way through it. I'd done 20 years in the army. It was the best thing I ever done. So in that time with junior leaders, they basically take this, wet behind the ears, 5 stone wet, Scottish kid, and after 12 weeks of moulding, shall we say, which is more you just do basic military skills, going to jail quite a few times. I can remember always going to jail because I had the worst block job in the world. So block job, what I mean, is when you have inspections, some of you can clean the toilets, some of you do stairwells and so on and so forth. I had the job of a store cupboard. And you might think that was, what's that to do with anything? I remember, so in the store cupboard, I would make sure all the brooms were all free from dust and fluff, all the mops were all clean, and I would spend ages and ages doing it. And I would put it all away, tidy it all up. And it was always that last minute thing, we would see the staff walking up the road, somebody would see a bit of fluff, run down the corridor, sweep it up, put it in the store cupboard. And then it quickly got to, I heard my name getting shouted on the first inspection. What's that bit of fluff down there? Don't know, staff, get outside, get to jail. And it got to a point after about 4 months of me going to jail probably every week because of his store cupboard, shall I say. One day I decided, the staff were walking up the path, I just ran out and started to mark time. And they turned around to me and they were like, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm going to jail anyway, so you might as well just, no point shouting at me, I'm off. See you later. And I'll march myself to jail. Got pasted for about 45 minutes, came back. And he actually said to me at the time, it's the cleanest you've ever seen the cupboard type thing. Like, so, lesson learned there, I suppose. We don't try and assume stuff, do we? But yeah, so in that period as well, there was a lot of education. And I'll mention this later on. As I say, there's a thing called, which always resonate with me, a thing called values and standards that we teach it. So, certain things like selfless commitment and honesty, they're really big in it. And they've done it in I wouldn't say a strange way, but they've done it in a way through religion. And I wasn't a religious guy. And to an extent, I'm still not, but at the same time, the analogy they gave you is when you're in a critical situation and, for example, the enemy's, not that far away from you, for example, one of the things you would do is look up to the sky and have a bit of prayer. And I've bore witness to that actually in my career. Like, so anyway, so I done the year's training. I had at the time joined called the Royal Corps of Transport.
Yep.
As a driver, because I thought to myself at the time, I'll get a trade. There's another story, sorry, shall I say, on that one, Blair, was when I was joining the army, I wanted to be a vehicle mechanic, like my brother was. And it said to me at the time, and I look back on it now thinking, now I know why you did it. He was ex-RCT, he was Royal Corps of Transport himself. And he went, yeah, no problems, mate, but you can't join the REMA yet, you'll have to wait 3 months. Just go and join the Royal Corps of Transport. And then in 3 months, go and speak to your staff member and tell them you're going to transfer. 3 months down the line, mate, marched in front of the old staff, said to him, right, I want to transfer. And I got told 2 words, mate, which I won't repeat on here. So the rest is history, as they say. But then when I found out, when I sort of done a bit of army careers advice in my time, you get a little bonus if you tell people to join your corps as such. So that's probably why I did it, bless him. Yeah, happy days, eh? So yeah, I joined RCT, but about 9 months into doing my training and becoming a driver, there was a small presentation thing that they'd done, and they had different trades in the corps at the time come along. A little stand right in the corner, there's all these big massive vehicles that you could drive, and there was a tiny stand in a tent right in the far corner. It caught my eye, and I went across just to, there was not many people there. It was quite a chubby lad, and I actually thought to myself at the time, for somebody who's in the army, you don't exactly have a shining example of being somebody who's fit and being in the army, but I'll go and have a chat with him. He looked a bit lonely, and he started to go and explain to himself what he'd done, and he was a military railwayman. So he actually drove trains for the army, as he put it to me. And I thought nothing of it, but his selling point to me, he said to me, we are based in Germany. The trade pay is the highest pay you'll ever get from any trade in the Corps. And actually, all we really do is drink beer and go out and get drunk all the time. I was sold, mate. I was done. I mean, I was signing that dotted line. So yeah, I chose two things really. One, it interested me a little bit because it was something different. There was like 150 guys being drivers. When we looked at the stats, there was only 4 people in that intake that became railwaymen, and obviously the guys to this day I still stay in touch with before we joined together. But that leads me sort of on to the next chapter. 1993, I finished training and I get posted out to Germany. My first impression, you get told, here's your plane ticket, you've got baggage, you get 2 suitcases, off you go. I was met by a guy at Hanover Station, so it was based in Mönchengladbach. Fantastic place in Germany. I would highly recommend going, to be fair. But got in this Sherpa, and I remember driving along, not really saying too much. You were a bit scared of, what was going to happen and stuff. And I remember I was a bit tired and I was just a bit dropping off. And suddenly I heard it was like a big explosion, shall we say. And that was on my first day of arrival. The driver who was driving me decided to show off. And there was a speed ramp down to the barracks. And he decided to take it 120 k's an hour just to wake me up. He misjudged it. He flew 4 wheels in the air and crashed into a tree, with me being in the minibus itself. And I woke up, shall we say. I can remember there was a big commotion and I must have drifted off. And I remember waking up in a hospital called Beersburg, which was, face was a bit of a mess. And that was my introduction to my first ever day on the job. I was in a road traffic accident.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah, so that was fantastic. But Germany itself, and this is where I'll align to certain things. When your normal person in the army joins, i.e. as a driver, as an infantry, whatever, safety for me in the railway, and it'll come on to why I've moulded my career all in rail, not necessarily anywhere else, is, when we started to do the training, I was only 17 and a half. I was allowed to drive HGV vehicles, so I had the thing called Crown Immunity, and they allowed me to drive locomotives. So part of your training was, I think it was a 14-week course, and you learned German signalling, locomotive driving, shunting, servicing, re-railing. So if you ever fell off the tracks, you could quickly put it back on again. So that was the first 14 weeks. And safety on that part was my first introduction to anything that was, this is what you need to sign, for example, so for servicing, it was just go and rub your hands in this good green paste, which I led to believe later on in life was Swarfiga, I think it was. So part of your safety brief was get that green stuff on you, go and service that locomotive. And you would get the green stuff on you, go out there. And I remember being underneath, taking out the plug for the main sump for the locomotive, and you would get caked in oil and literally rubbing out your eyes in the local pit. So you're up to your knees in oil because it was about 140 litres of oil. And you cracked on and you done your servicing. And then there was other stuff like, diesel. So you had to, drain the diesel tank sometimes, but instead of pumping it out, you probably do nowadays, you just open the valve and let it go into the ballast. And that's quite unusual because I always distinctly remember being in Germany and, with your waste, you had to wash your tins of beans and stuff to put it in the blue recycling bins because they were really adamant on recycling at the time. And then I'm in another scenario where I'm dropping diesel, into the forefoot. So contamination wise, and as I said, I've been involved in many incident investigations since then with diesel spills and know the cost of how much it costs to clean up. It's quite strange looking back. I always wonder as well, because Mönchengladbach Football Club took over where we were posted. And I remember always thinking to myself, I wonder when they dug that ballast up and they've seen all the diesel and oil and all that. So there must have been some damage done, should I say, with, from that time. And you're talking about that was probably done 30, 40 years of doing that. So, so that was one of my first things that I thought of safety wise for this evening was, how far it's came to an extent. But also from that early days in the army, we were involved quite heavily within rail, shall I say, with safety. So prime example, what we're very good at in the army is briefing. And we are very good at saying to people, do this, but from a constructive way. So if I'm in charge of something, I would do the briefing instead of one person doing that briefing, and communication wise is very good then. And I think that set me up a little bit with regards to how I understand how I can do safety briefs and various other stuff I engage. So I think that was part of it. But Germany was fantastic. I spent 4 years there. I was involved in two accidents in my time there. Don't really take great pride in. The first one was a derailment. I derailed a locomotive. I drove it over a derailer. I maybe shouldn't say this, but I didn't say this in the inquiry, but I was throwing berries at my mate. So when we drove past a tree came in the window, and all these little red berries fell on the control unit. So we were there throwing berries at each other, on a bit of a laugh, and we forgot the derailer was still on the rail. Next thing you know, we're bumping along, and we're like, we're just derailed. So in the days of the army, when we'd done accident investigations, it was pretty much you stood to attention in front of your sergeant major after he's done an accident investigation, as he calls it, and then you're getting 14 days jail. So that was fun. We call it jail. It was more, what would we call it, character building, should we say? And they would say jail. You couldn't really say it was jail. And that was part of how things worked. And then the second one, as I said, was another derailment. And this time it was more a failure of the equipment. So again, when you look at things you go back on and experience-wise, and again, accident investigation, sometimes there is a human factor to it, and sometimes there's a mechanical factor to it. And I can distinctly remember, and it's happened to me 3 times in my career. In the army, I've had 3 brake failures, on one in Kosovo, which I'll come on to in a sec. But that first one was a bit of a scary experience. And again, the only thing I'll take from it is what I do nowadays is, from a point of well-being wise, it was quite scary for me what happened. At the time when I got out and I was, the bottom lip was trembling a little bit, I can distinctly remember my corporal coming up to me, telling me to get a grip, get back in the locomotive, the other one that we brought along, and crack on. And that was again, so you just basically had a major accident where you were thinking your life flashed before your eyes, and you're getting told to get back on the spare locomotive you've got and carry on, because we've got a job to do. So it's quite character building, as I said already, but also if you look at that, go back, fast forward now to what we've got in place and certain things that we do, that would never have happened probably now. And I'm sure in the military as well, they've evolved just as much as what health and safety does, just as much as what other industries do. But yeah, so in that 4 years, I learned, and I got promotion in that first 4 years, which was good, to become a lance corporal. And basically, the majority of the time I spent in Germany was the job of a locomotive driver for a depot. But we also done mainline driving in Germany. So I learned how to drive mainline locomotives. And we basically said there was 7 or 8 depots across in Germany that we went to support the troops and the activities were going there. And the good thing about the military and the trade I was in, I could then spend 3-4 years in one job, and I could go and do another job if I fancied before coming back to that trade again. So I chose to go, because we were dual traded, we were still drivers. So I went and done 2 years in Catterick, and that gave me my a bit of a different feeling stuff on how life works in the army. And again, one of the things that when people see this as a bad thing, Blair, is when you look at CVs sometimes and people spend 3-4 years and then they go and do something else, or and I've had it myself. I've had comments myself of we don't spend too much time in a job, for example. My analogy is you've always got to learn, you've always got to progress sometimes, and sometimes that isn't staying for 5, 6, 7 years in a job. If you want to progress in your life, again, we talk about advice to people. The army was really good for that. If you showed willing, if you showed that you wanted to have a natural progression, why not? If I don't know something, especially in health and safety, but it's a vast array of policies, procedures, and understanding of stuff. And so, in one part, I would say, stick to what you know. But at the same time, don't be afraid to go and learn something else. And that's the analogy. It's stuck with me really, and I think that's one. It's the behaviour from the army. So 3 years, 2 years. Maybe it is a bit of a lesson learned. Maybe I do need to. I'm not saying I don't commit to a company. What I mean by that is I stick internally, but I go and do different things. Because I think it's quite a fair thing to do. We go back to, as I said, the 2 years in Catterick. That's when I've done my first couple of tours, and a couple of operational tours in Northern Ireland, which was fun. Strangely enough, I'm not, as I said, I'm not religious, but I was brought up as a Protestant, and please don't, shoot me down for that. My mum's a Catholic, my dad's a Protestant, but I went to Protestant school. We won't talk about football and who I support and stuff, but we do wear blue, and they do play in Glasgow, like so. One of the big things from that is I remember being in Northern Ireland doing the marches, and it was all quite, let's put it that way, it's quite intense. We were putting up barricades for the orange marches. I remember getting attacked, and in petrol bombed and various other stuff of people calling me certain other things that, and it was a bit of a strange one. But it was a good learning curve when you do operational tours. You're away for 6 months, and then I went to Bosnia. Bosnia was again totally different country as a driver, but satisfaction wise, you're doing a peacekeeping type role and you're delivering supplies to the troops, but also doing stuff for the local communities and that. It wasn't always just pure. Bosnia definitely wasn't just, people think you go on tour and you're not looked after. I always distinctly remember we had an up and coming News of the World reporter come up. It was brought on, and I was married at the time, so I remember a couple of years before I went to Bosnia, I got married. And I went to Bosnia, and I remember this News of the World reporter coming to the ops cell, and I was doing a job at the time as the ops corporal, so I was dealing with all the transport and logistics of how we take stuff. And I was chosen out of the cast of two to go and take this reporter and his guest for a drive in the yard and show the guest how it all works, how we drive the trucks and how we offload the trucks and stuff. That guest was somebody called Katie Price. As we all know who Katie Price is, Jordan, but she was introduced as Katie Price. And the reason I mentioned it, the story was, so I remember doing it, and I remember there was nice photographs of Katie Price with me, a bit of arm around each other and nice smiley pics. And there was a couple, as it was News of the World, there was a couple of times where she removed a few bits of clothing with me next to her. And I thought nothing of it. I thought, yeah, okay, but it's good. Off you go. I've got a job to do. I remember 2 days later, it was Christmas Day, and I decided to phone my wife and say Happy Christmas.
It's not put in the paper, is it? Oh, brilliant.
It wasn't just a little tiny bit, mate, of, it wasn't like page 3. This is center spread of the News of the World. Happy Christmas from Bosnia. And it had me and Katie Price in the very middle, mate. I'm talking about a double page in the News of the World. Me and a topless Katie Price, all happy, all smiley and all that sort of stuff. So my Christmas Day message to my wife to say Happy Christmas and I'm missing her, that ended up being probably a 10-minute threat of divorce and all that nice stuff. So I thought, okay, she hung up on me. I rang my mum just to say Happy Christmas. Same scenario, mate. I've got a mum. So I was like, oh, so yeah. So yeah, it was painful, mate. It was good for the 5 minutes, mate. It was showing around the vehicle park and stuff, but yeah, there was a bit of pain and a bit of explanation to do, mate, for a few days after that. I was lucky enough. I was on R&R for New Year, so I managed to get back and smooth it all away. But yeah, that was my memory of Bosnia. It was maybe not Bosnia itself. It was more Katie Price and what it led to. But yeah, so realistically after Bosnia, I went back to trade. So back to being this railwayman. And at that time, we'd moved from Germany to Marchwood, where there was 17 Port Maritime, which was a military port, which is still there today. What a fantastic regiment. It's the best. Probably stayed in Southampton for 6 years. Although I left the family in Southampton. I went to do another job up in Purbright. the whole community, the whole spirit of Southampton and the regiment was fantastic. I was a bit of a tracksuit soldier then as well. I love my football, so obviously, I played a lot of football. I also done a tour of Kosovo as a railwayman. And the reason I mention that is I'm massively proud of that, because it was the first time since World War that any military railway had deployed anywhere in the world. And we've done that for 9 months. So we basically ran a line of communication from Greece, from the port all the way up to Teretna and Pristina, up in Kosovo. The majority of it was, I would say, military equipment and tools and vehicles, but we also done humanitarian aid. And there was a lot of different projects that we've done. We built schools, we've done a lot for Pristina. We employed people, we brought people together. So there was a bit of a thing with Albanians and Serbians, and I remember in the workshop, because they had to service the locomotives, if I wanted a spanner, I would have to talk to the Albanian guy and say, can you pass me the spanner? And he would say no, because the Serbian guy had touched it. So you had to clean it with a baby wipe and then give it. The Albanian guy would then pass you the spanner. In the end, you would just get the spanner yourself, because it was one of them. But it was a fantastic tour, 9 months. And again, I'll go back to safety, and in my career over my time in the army, I'm probably one of the very few privileged guys who started to get involved in safety from a military point of view, believe it or not, and from a railway point of view as well. So I started to develop a lot of skills and knowledge in safety. Not to an extent nowadays, it's not, to what we do or what we see now, but actually writing safety cases for the British Army to go across and deploy in a railway environment was one. But also we had to write standard operating procedures, as you would call it, like a rule book, for example. But we did also have a military railways rule book that we always used, but you had to adapt it to your present surroundings and train people and make sure people were competent to drive. So there was a lot of route learning done. But yeah, that was in that way as well. I seen a change. So from the 4 years in Germany to getting to the UK, we had PTS as well. So that was another thing of personal track safety. We started to get clued up on personal track safety. He sent me off to be a COS. I knew nothing at the time. It was like, you've got to go and do, you're quite switched on, mate. You know a lot about railways. You've got to go and be a COS, which is now a safe work leader. I remember going on the course, and there was all these guys who knew everything about the railway. And there's me sat, and I'll be really honest with you, I knew a little bit, but what stood me out from the rest of them, and I remember him saying that, was my briefing. So when you done your brief to the workforce, I was, as they called it, military briefing. I done little diagrams, I done little maps and stuff, and said, right, I got to take a knee, but they wouldn't take a knee, as we used to call it, but we couldn't. But I used to, and I passed that course, and so I started to get used to the general rules of operating in the UK as well, because we had some depots that we operated, Luggershaw being one of them, Andover, which was so there was a couple of places in the UK. Funnily enough, though, Marchwood was a military port, but we never operated in Marchwood because we had a civilian crew there and they had a good union. So the rest is history. We couldn't ever operate there. So in Kosovo, we done 9 months. I wrote the safety case. We done the training. And in that context, then we started to look at risk assessments, but it wasn't to an extent of, getting involved in. It was more tick box, if I'm being honest. There was a bit of a tick box here with a risk assessment on certain things that we've done. Again, it gave me the experience, which is the point I'm trying to make. Is I started building that experience in a safety role, as well as logistics and as well as other stuff. So we done Kosovo. We had massive success there, apart from, as I said to you a little bit ago, about a derailment. We had a massive derailment over there, to a point where we thought we had lost someone from there, but luckily, I'll come on to the story anyway. But long and the short of it is, we were operating a line of communication. We were driving mainline locomotives with 1,500 tons on the back of them. These locomotives were travelling, you could probably get about 80 to 100 kilometres an hour out of them. And there was an American base that we used to pop by every day. Probably at that time, because of the curve of the track and various other stuff, you could probably get to you were doing about 50 k's an hour. And And every day we would blow the horn and wave to them, and they would, you know, the big American woo-has and all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say they were pretty used to us every day going by.
Yep.
So it still fails me to think why they then decided one day, you know, to dump, I think it was about 500 tons of spoil on the level crossing.
Oh, no.
So you know where this is coming now, don't you? Yeah. So 500 tons of spoil on the crossing, 50 k's an hour with 1,500 tons on the back. When you come around the corner, you've got about 160 meters to stop. You're not going to stop, are you?
No.
So this locomotive decided to probably take about 3 or 4 of the front axles off the ground and tipped up on its side.
Mm-hmm.
That in itself was, you know, if you think about the story and you think about when we spoke to the driver, you know, that is a true life-changing moment. His biggest thing was that his third man, or his shunter, was on the footplate at the time. And he seen it coming and he jumped off.
Mm-hmm.
As he jumped off, you know, the guy was 6 foot. I would say he's probably about 6'2", 6'3", quite a stocky young lad, very fit. He was only getting out 3-4 months after this tour, so he had a good career to think about and stuff. He jumped out and hit a whistle board,
Mm-hmm.
and at the time we didn't know, but he broke his leg, I think it was, and knocked himself out. But when the train came over, there was another 3 or 4 wagons that went over on its side as well. And the driver, as he got out, he looked and seen, or he thought basically that boy was underneath the wagons. And he said once all the dust had settled and the Americans came running out and stuff, he said that, you know, all the commotion he's seen in the background, this, I think he said that she must have been about 5'2", carrying a 6'3", probably he was about 14 stone, you know, fit lad. And basically she carried him, dropped him in front of everybody and shot off again. And he had broke his leg. But yeah, go back to that is, you know, my take on that, it should never have happened. But if you look at it, you should never take anything for granted, should you? You know, but at the same time, if you look at the analogy I would give, you know, putting 500 tons of spoil on a level crossing when you know there's trains running on a regular basis probably wasn't the best plan, shall we say, on that. Which again, if you look at some of the things that we have in the industry, it does tend to lead to poor planning. Let's be honest. But yeah, so there was that, and I investigated that. That was my first real accident that I sort of done an investigation into, and I got a lot of time, you know, a lot of experience from that. I found a bit of a niche because I liked it. I felt like I was the military version of Colombo at times, but at the same time, compared to my experience that I had when I had my derailment, I used that to say, well, I would never do that, because if you're going to punish someone straight away for doing something that they've done, fair enough, I deserve the punishment with the berries type thing. But at the same time, you won't get nothing from it. You will not get lessons learned, as we call it nowadays, don't we? So I done it in that way, you know, and even with Americans, and we interviewed a few of the guys who'd done the planning. It wasn't you know, it was a heated conversation with some people, but I'd done it more of a, let's sit down, let's take me through your planning process. And actually, for me, it helped me risk assess it to an extent. It helped me also understand what goes into, you know, what do we call it? Well, we call it mitigating circumstances, don't we, nowadays when we investigate something. And it was a really good eye-opener for me, if I'm being really honest, for that. And yeah, we had a lot of good lessons learned that came from it. More importantly, as we said, is not to trust. Well, we actually stopped. That's what we started to do. Actually, we actually stopped the train before on that level crossing before we proceeded again, which was maybe not the best idea because it took you 15, 20 minutes to get started again. But the benefit from that is we could stop and have a chat with the Americans, and we could swap kit. It was brilliant because the Americans always had the best kit. We were given the worst kit, so we'd always get off and do exchanges. You know, they were crazy. Some of these Americans would offer you, you know, guns and stuff, and you're like, I can't, you know, you can't do that. But at the same time, the ration packs were better, so we'd swap ration packs, and they were like, this ration pack, man's the best ration pack I've seen in my life. You'd be like, you're trying eating it for 4 days, you'll soon be constipated, mate. But you know, they had some really good kit. Yeah, it was fun, shall we say? But it was a good thing that came from that. Yeah, it was for me. Then that was my first step into real accident investigation, safety. and I sort of progressed from there, especially with training. So again, I was dual traded. I was a driver, as I've already said, and I was a railwayman. I developed a good passion for military skills. Maybe it was ingrained in me from passed down because I've had relatives, uncles, grandfathers, and people like that in the army. Maybe it's, it was natural, but I was very good at military tactics, and I was very good at being in the field and being a soldier at the end of the day. So I decided in my career to be a military instructor, so military skills instructor. So I went to Powerbright for a couple of years, and that's when I started to get into coaching. So I like to, yes, I was that guy who, if you joined the army, I would be the good cop, bad cop sometimes, and I could, did I take pride in making people cry and stuff? No, I'm joking. I wouldn't have never done that, mate. But I could be nasty. At the same time, I could be. I remember saying to myself, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be like the guy who trained me, although the guy who trained me was fantastic and I'm still in touch with him. I wanted to be like someone who I could try and install all my experience and knowledge into a short space of time. So 14 weeks for a young lad to come through, going through what he was doing. I tried to show a bit of empathy. So I put myself in his position. And again, people want to see is analogies from health and safety to your experience in the army to an extent. And part of that was, from not wanting to be that nasty guy, I wanted someone to come there and learn, because I wanted to set him up and I wanted to make him aware of what he will have to go through. So I was thinking ahead for a year down the line, thinking, when I joined, I wasn't aware of this. And so I actually started to teach him different things that weren't part of the syllabus, but we had time to do it. So I coached people, and that's what I tried to do. I got the best out. So I treated them as individuals. So I got the best out of them by treating them as individuals. So the analogy I would say there is, especially with workers, especially with guys, we're not all the same. We're not all robots. We're not all soldiers, as we call them. And if you treat them like individuals, to me, I find it better, because some people I do get a lot out of if you have conversations with. But bearing in mind, there are other people where you've got to tell. You know what I mean? And that's the analogy I still practice that today. I get to know the people. And if you get to know your workforce, it helps you out massively. And as I said, it helps with, it's a bit like, and I'll go into in a bit with the role of a supervisor. At that time, I was that supervisor. I was the black hat, as they call it, or the site manager, with 14, well, it was 35 guys. I was the guy who would coach, mentor, nurture these guys, but impart my knowledge onto them. At the same time, get what you needed from them as such. And I found that worked. I found that, each soldier who I trained, I wouldn't know the stats, but I do know for a fact that there's a lot of soldiers I've trained, I still see them, and they've done really well in their careers. And not that I'm going to take any credit for it, it's aim at take the credit for it. But at the same time, I gave them the tools, I gave them the foundation to go and build from there. And that's something that I try and do with anybody, a blue hat who joins, even a guy who tells he's 20 years experience in the railway or 20 years experience in a job. I will still try and gauge a guy, and I'll try and get it out of him, coaching, not me telling, get it out of him what he feels, what he knows. Because I think that's a fundamental characteristic of being a health and safety practitioner, professional, whatever we want to call it, is we've got to have a safety conversation with people. And that's not, I'm telling you, that's not, like, stop, I'm telling you what you've done wrong, because they'll never learn from it, mate, as people will know. You've got to stop them, you've got to then ask them and say to them, what do you think? Why have I stopped you? What do you think you've done wrong? Is there anything you can do differently? The 3 questions that I've just said there are great openers, or great, sort of things that you can get information out of people. Because, like I say it as well, a lot of people do like a whinge, but at the same time, people do like to impart knowledge onto you as well. And that would be another thing. Don't be scared to ask yourself. We are, subject matter experts in certain things. We've got to, don't be scared if you don't understand it. It doesn't mean that you're a bad health and safety guy, and within that place, go and ask, because at the end of the day, that's the only way you'll learn. So that's a bit of an analogy, mate. Yeah, I think with the Fulbright, it was more for me to do with leadership and development, and I started to get really into the leadership and the coaching and the mentoring side of stuff, um, and also as I said, just bringing a young lad, and after 14 weeks, watching him pass out on a parade square as a soldier, it's probably the best job I've done for job satisfaction.
Yeah.
Because you turn and we had some, pardon me what I'm saying, you're right, Egypt's tipping up, you know what I mean? But you could, in 14 weeks' time, these guys were fantastic lads, you know what I mean? So yeah, that took me onto that. And as I said, my career then went between a railwayman, being, and not necessarily a driver anymore. I started to do a lot of teaching in the army, especially military skills. So I've done other tours within, places doing military skills within the regiment or in various other places. So, and one of the best things that I try to go for, Sandhurst was another one I tried to go there. I remember what let me down on Sandhurst was I mentioned I was a railwayman, if I'm being honest with you. Because he said to me, "What trade are you?" And I said, I was proud to say it, mate. I was proud to say I'm a military railway operator. You could see him just go, "What? You know, what's that?" "Yeah, I'm a military railway operator." "What do you know about map reading or firing a weapon?" Or and actually, when you do peer assessments on the training, I came out top because I was actually very good at what I'd done. But it probably, if you look at it, it wouldn't have when I went if I'd went on to further my career trying to go into Sandhurst, it wouldn't have done me any. And there was another story I had. Not turn the clock back a bit. I remember I went to Inverness once because I volunteered to be a police guy who not necessarily RMP, but you could go and pick up prisoners in the UK and take them from jails to the guard room as such. So mostly guys that went AWOL. And I remember I went up to Inverness and the Black Watch were up there, and I tipped up, said to him, "Right, I'm here to get this guy." And he said, "Right, it'll be about 20 minutes, mate. Take a seat. Do you want to have a coffee?" And I was sat there, and this corporal on the guard room said, "So what do you do?" And mate, you have a little conversation with him. The minute I said I was a railwayman, he went, "Sorry, mate, come again." I said, "Yeah, I'm a railwayman. I drive trains." And no, I used to just humour him a little bit. I said, "Yeah, I drive trains for a living." He said, "Okay, not a problem." And he went off and I heard him on the phone. Next thing you know, there was 55 people outside. And I felt like a celebrity, mate. Yeah, they wanted to see a military train driver. Yeah, and I had to explain to all these people what I'd done for a living because they were all like, we couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe there's a guy in front of me dressed in uniform, as a corporal, and he drives trains for a living. I mean, and in a way, the whole trade element during my 20 years in the army, there was that railway children or Thomas the Tank Engine pun that you'd always get, and I'm glad I hope I'm still, Fat Controller was another one that I've had before, which I took quite to heart, if I'm being honest. But yeah, there was certain analogies through my career that it was always that, but at the same time, the thing I would say was we were a force enabler, and for the army, we could take Kosovo prime example. Instead of using 100 trucks, for example, we could do it by train. It's just a shame my knowledge of carbon savings and that we could have. It led to anyway. We got rid of the trade, hence I left. But we could have gave it. I wonder if I could have sold it through a carbon efficiency saving when we were trying to get rid of us, maybe. But if I could turn the clock back, then maybe. But yeah, it got me to a career where I actually taught warrant officers as well. So, I was a warrant officer at the time, WO2, Sergeant Major, and I went to a training establishment to train staff sergeants how to be warrant officers. And a proud achievement of mine was I developed the whole training. So I redeveloped the whole training syllabus for the Royal Logistic Corps as we went to, I was RCT, went to the Royal Logistic Corps. And I've got I take quite, really good bit of pride in that because it's still in play today. So if you talk to guys who go on that training, they still do stuff that I taught them or I put into that syllabus. So, all right, and that was, I left the army many, 2012, I left the army. But we still have stuff in that training course that I've done. Not all of it, but there's little bits of it. So yeah, but in the end, I got to Warrant Officer Class 1, which was the highest rank you could ever get. I was the official title was W1 in brackets QMSI, Quartermaster Sergeant Instructor of Rail. So I ended up becoming the top railwayman, and there was a certain predecessor of mine who used to call himself the Master Railwayman, and I thought I was a bit like a Jedi, and I thought I loved that, but I couldn't have that title, which was a shame. I just ended up being a QMSI, which I was like, I wanted to be this Master Railwayman. Again, put that to what we'll talk about later on. I see a lot of, when I talk about different titles and different stuff that people have, I think that's something that we definitely need to look at, because I see safety specialists, safety professionals, practitioners, various other job titles. We're all the same.
And you've got PC manager now as well, haven't you?
Yeah, and I'll talk about the PC thing. That is something that, I'll talk about in a bit, mate, but yeah, that's not, it is safety. It's a massive thing about safety, but you're not seen as a safety guy on that role. You're seen as a guy who should know everything, as a CDM, guru, ninja, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, and we'll come on to that, how I fall into that role, and I've done it quite well, in my opinion, but obviously other opinions. I think it is based on the military. I'm a logistician. I do logistics, I do planning, and I'll explain in a bit about the role. It's about everything, but to me, it's still safety. It's CDM. And there is an argument we could have, and I'm sure we'll talk about it as well, about what I'm going to do in the future. I've got a distinct. I want to do something about CDM, and especially the role of the PD and PC. I do think there is a fundamental, whether it's a lack of understanding still, or if it's just I don't know what it is, mate. I need to get my finger on it. The lack of PD, PC involvement, shall I say?
Yep.
But also the role of the PD. I don't really think people do understand what that role is. Maybe in a rail, I can't, obviously, from a construction point of view, I can see it from a construction point of view, but even across construction and rail and just normal infrastructure construction, I don't see it. I also hear a lot about safety and design. Again, I'm passionate about that as well. And with Morgan Sindall infrastructure now, as we speak, I'm talking to, there's a few passionate guys in Morgan Sindall who want to develop that a lot more, because they see it needs to be something that we need to seriously consider. But yeah, if I go back to me, I digress slightly a bit. We'll come on to it more. As I said, W1, I became overall part of the College of Logistics. So I became this guru, as you say, on rail training, and I was responsible then for the whole of the rail training for the British Army. But also I done rail training for the MOD, because we had MOD depots, and I was the main safety guy for the whole of the MOD rail, basically. And another good thing that I'd done, I advised defence. This is no secret. I used to go to Whitehall now and again, and advise on certain military type railway operations, Afghanistan being one of them. It's I'm not giving away secrets here. Afghanistan, we thought about logistics and how we could get logistics quicker to the guys on the ground, because there was certain places that you would go to deliver logistics to, were always being compromised, shall we say, or there was always that threat. And we looked at the Khyber Pass. Yeah. And that was before anybody went out to an extent to Afghan, we came through Pakistan. I went out with a group of individuals who, if you see them in papers, have got little dark things over their eyes and stuff. And it was a good experience, going out there, recceing the Khyber Pass, seeing the rail network out there. But it was all blown to shreds the minute I seen a bridge, because that was my analogy. Fantastic railway. Yes, there's a really good line of communication, but there's about 55 bridges and tunnels. Exactly what you'd have to think about. What was the first thing you would do to disable a line of communication? You take out your bridges or you take out your tunnels. So that idea was quickly quelled. And I think, and I shouldn't, it was nothing to do with me, why we got, there was no need for a railway squadron anymore after a while. But that was, I think, the downfall to having logistics and rail in the army was it's a fixed guided system. You can't exactly build around, you can't say, all right, we'll build alternative routes. Very difficult. And I think that was part of the downfall as such of having a real, capability, shall I say. And that led me to obviously doing certain things as head of trade. It was a big thing that I was sad about. I spent 9 months doing a real capability study with a really good friend of mine who was a major at the time, who was ex officer commanding of 79 Railway Squadron, which I was part of. A guy called Simon Watkins, who I love the guy to death. And we spent nine months trying to persuade hierarchy, shall we say, that there was still a capability. And I remember going in front of brigadiers, 2-star general, trying to justify Simon, bless him. The general basically said, why do we need a railway squadron? We don't need them anymore. And Simon's, to come back on that was, well, you might as well get rid of your nuclear deterrent because you don't need that anymore. And, which I thought was brilliant. I don't think it done well for his career. But at the same time, we worked tirelessly on that for 9 months to be, and I remember the penny dropped when I went in one day with a vast amount of paperwork to justify. I remember the guy who gave that paperwork to say, okay, thanks, Mr. White. I'll look at it. I went and seen him 2 weeks later, and I remember looking at his entry, and there was a lot of paperwork on top. Mine was still down the bottom. I mean, I'd say to him, have you had a look at that, sir? He was like, yeah, well, we'll discuss it another time. And I thought, I think the writing's on the wall here. And yeah, it was a horrible thing to do, but I had to go through redundancies for guys. So I had, there was only 35, I think it was 35, 36 railwaymen left. And at that time we were in Bicester, where I currently still live. That was in the MOD depot where we used to do operations and stuff. I had to tell 30 odd guys that they didn't have a career anymore. Luckily, we managed to send certain people away to do other trades. Unfortunately, there were guys who were older guys, guys with 4 kids, 5 kids. You have to tell them you were leaving the army. I mean, that's not nice. It wasn't nice. And at the same time, I was going through commissioning. So they would want me to be a captain, become a late entry captain. I was going through training. And I always remember thinking to myself, that's all right, mate, you look after yourself, where you're telling everybody else, if you get made redundant, you're losing your trade, you're losing your capability, you're losing something that you've loved to do for on and off for 20 years of your life. And I remember thinking that, and I had a conversation with someone who said, look, the whole reason for you commissioning is we can keep the knowledge within the corps. And I thought to myself, yeah, it's a good way of putting it to an extent, in case we ever needed it, and we still had the Territorial Army Squadron that no doubt I would have looked after as such. And I remember going in front of the brigadier. I'd done my commissioning cadre, and he told me I was going to be successful. And I think out of 60, I was number 5 on the list of. And I remember him pausing and saying to me, in my years that I've done this, you're the first person it's looked sad. I've told him he's going to be commissioned in my corps. And I basically told him then, I said, I'm not going to do it. I think I'm going to take redundancy with the guys. I'm going to follow my sword, as I called it. And his words to me, again, I won't repeat what he said to me. He called me a certain word. But one of the things that stuck with me was, he said to me, I will never get a career outside of the army. It's the best career I'm ever going to get. I'm throwing away, a career. Think of your kids, think of your family. You're going to throw your life away. And I said to him, thanks very much, sir, for my motivation. I mean, that's exactly what I needed. So went back. As he called it, there was 9 clicks. He called it the 9 clicks of death, which was basically 9 clicks you would put on the system to make it, not volunteer for redundancy, but choose redundancy. That was in 2011. So you go into a thing called resettlement. So you've got to think about what you need to do, various other stuff, what you need to do for transferable skills, shall we say. And again, I'll go into that, is I think one of my biggest regrets, especially being in that W1 post, I never managed to, I was trying at the time, but I didn't have the time to do NVQ training for the guys. because I think if I had been subject to NVQs when I joined the army, when I joined the railway squadron, I wouldn't have said I'd done any better, but I would have had a better, firmer grounding to, because a lot of it is based on competency, and it people will look at you and say you've not had experience based on qualification, as I'll come on to in a bit. But I just wish I'd developed NVQs a lot quicker, so that these guys and girls who were coming through would have had a better, firmer footing when we made them redundant. But couldn't, so it's a bit of regret. But yeah, I went for an interview with Freightliner, and I got the job.
Yeah.
And this was when I was doing my resettlement, and this was when I was going through redundancy. And I remember with Freightliner, I was going to be a general manager. And one of the things that they said to me was, can we see your tickets for driving online, driving your Class 66s and all that. I remember saying to him, I haven't got any tickets. He's like, well, why are you applying for this job? I said, well, I can drive a 66 class locomotive. I've been doing it for, Kosovo, we drove Kennedys, but I was doing training. In part of that training, I was driving 66s up and down Andover, as part of the training. I said, so I can drive them, it's not an issue. I said, but I don't know how it happened. Maybe it was just me selling myself. He still gave me the job. When he said, actually, we'll train you up, we'll just get you on a local for 7-8 weeks and give you your tickets, but we still want you to do the job. I thought, brilliant, happy days. I'm going to work for Freightliner. I then got a phone call in September 2011 saying we've mocked up. You're not on the redundancy list as we thought because you're not old enough. You've not done your time. And I was like, no, when you think I'm set, I'm going to go and get a nice job. And bear in mind, I know I only looked 21. I was 35, I think, at the time, quite young. So, I was quite a young one officer, actually. I was promoted very fast in my time. I can distinctly remember going, what do I need to do then? I've got a job. A lot of things went through my mind. And I remember my commanding officer saying to me at the time, it's tough, you're just going to have to wait another year. I remember going home and I was thinking to myself, they can't do this to me. They can't. I've got to do something about it. And I went back the next day and I said to him, look, this job was X amount of money. They've offered me this amount. I'm going to have to turn the job down. So be it on you. I can't not sit on this and say you're going to, in the next 20 years of my life, I could have been earning X amount. And I put that to him, which is a bit unfair. So he said to me, okay, you still can't get out, and if you cop off even more, even though you're a one-officer, you can still go to jail or we can still demote you because you're still in that. So I had to bite my lip. At the same time, he said to me, look, we'll sort it for you. Why don't you go and get the job? We'll allow you to go and get the job. So I went back to him and I lost the job. I lost, even though they had offered me it, I couldn't sign anything until and all that. They said to me they couldn't commit to that. They couldn't commit to me being in the army. And even though the army was happy with me doing it, they said they don't want it. They want me because they thought for some bizarre reason I would change my mind and go back in the army. Anyway, I'm a big believer in fate. What happens. So that path wasn't meant to be. I wasn't going to be a general manager. So in that time of doing more resettlement, they gave me more resettlement. And I remember then, I'd already done my NEBOSH general and IOS managing safely when I was doing my sort of W1 military career type thing with training. So I decided, why don't I sit there and I'll do my NEBOSH construction. And I done that one. I thought, I enjoyed that. It might sound bizarre. We've all done NEBOSH exams and stuff. You go away from there with a numb hand because you've written for 10 men. But at the same time, I found it easy because my knowledge that I had already. I found it really easy to sit with the NEBOSH stuff. So I've done the construction, environmental management, oil and gas. I've done everything, every single one. I actually started to collect certificates, if I'm being honest. I used to in the army, I used to be a badge collector. Now I'm starting to collect NEBOSH certificates. And to be fair to the army, they give you money, they give you support, transition. So it's fantastic. And I think you do see a lot of people coming out of the army with qualifications in health and safety, and I've advised a lot of people actually who leave the army who talk to me because they obviously see what I do for a career, and they say to me, how can I be as successful to an extent as what you are? And I also give them a bit of caution, because as I've just explained it over the last, half an hour or so, again, I'm a railwayman. I've gained a lot of knowledge in health and safety in a railway environment. So it's not as easy as just getting 5 or 6 certificates and going out there and saying I'm a health and safety manager. You've got to have that experience as well. So I used to say to them, best thing you can do is your NEBOSH general, NEBOSH construction, if you're going into a construction environment. So yes, that's your foundation, shall we say. That proves that, you've got the capacity to learn, you've got the capacity to study, look at literature, look at policy procedure, and then push it forward to, advising as such or whatever. But I also say to them, don't go in there thinking that you're a high senior health and safety manager. Although I do know some of them that have, made that transition and went into senior appointments straight away. Fair play to them, and I would say each to your own. I've done very similar, if I'm being honest. I didn't go into a health and safety in a way. I've never been a health and safety advisor. I've never been an administrator in health and safety. I did go into a manager's role straight away, but because, as I said, transferable skills. But I've employed a lot of people since then, and it's advice that I would give. I love career progression. It's part of my army thing, and I do love. I've got a graduate who's worked with me for the last year and a half, a girl called Ellie Jackson. She is, she's a ray of sunshine. She is fantastic and really, really passionate, committed to wanting a career in health and safety. And the good thing I like about Morgan Sindall is that they don't, they're one of these companies who don't necessarily hold you to one position, but also with the graduate scheme that they do, and also with just in general career progression, they are really good at nurturing talent, shall we say, and pushing them at the same time, but managing expectations in it. You don't. So, and I talk about Ellie and advice that I give her, and it's again for this forum, especially with a graduate. I always say to Ellie, and I have many chats with her. You've got to learn first. You've got to, just take a step back and learn, but also find your niche. So Ellie's very good at well-being. She loves. She's a mental health first aider. She loves mental health first aid. She's very good at fatigue management. She's very good at hand-arm vibration, and so I tend to say to her, nurture that and study that. Look at that first, and become my advisor on hand-arm vibration and become my advisor on fatigue management. And once she's got that, after a few months, I'll give her something else to do, and I'll say, well, I don't tell her. You sit down with her, don't you, and you say, what are you passionate about next? And then you say, what don't you like? Well, and she'll be the first to tell me, I don't like doing that. I don't like standing in front of people. I don't like giving briefs. And to be fair, I've said, okay, next week you're giving a brief in front of the workforce. I mean, so there's a bit of that as well, isn't there? You've got to put in the comfort zone a little bit.
Outside the comfort zone, that's it, definitely.
Yeah. But the good thing I've said to Ellie, and she's, and sadly she's going to leave us in a couple of weeks for a promotion, but I take great pride in that, because she's went from a graduate, she finishes a graduate scheme, I think it's next week. We could have kept her on as we call it, a health and safety administrator. She's very good at the stats. She's very good at putting the spreadsheets together. Although again, Morgan Sindall Infrastructure, we've got a thing called Power BI that we use for all your nice stats. Fantastic tool to use.
Yeah, it's great.
I call him a technical ninja, a guy called Kash Chima, who, he should be, I don't know, building space shuttles for Elon Musk or something like that, not necessarily doing what he does for us. But he's put, and it's a really good tool, and it saves us a lot of time and effort. Go back to the days where you sat there on doing databases and spreadsheets. Click a button nowadays, and I can tell exactly what my AFR is, and I can tell you exactly, what the trends are. And this technology I'm seeing ever evolving, starting to look at trends. And one of the things I've always said is I would love to be a proactive health and safety, not a reactive health and safety guy, because I think we're always reactive. And I would love to get into the basic hindsight, looking at what can we do in prevention. And we do a lot of good stuff, and I'm not saying we don't. I would rather be proactive than reactive. and that's a thing that I would love to do. And I think with the technology we're seeing, for an example I can give, I can tell you trends that we have on the project at the minute seem to be on a Tuesday. Because I'm not saying it's, we're not relying on technology, but we can get good evidence from technology and stats that tell us on a Tuesday that we have the most accidents. And you think to yourself, okay, so why is that? And you do a bit of deep dive into it. And actually on the railways, you work a lot of weekends, and people tend not to come in on a Monday and have a bit of time off. So on a Tuesday, everybody comes back fresh, from a nice break, but sometimes they're not switched on straight away, and they're thinking about the previous weekend. So that's my take on it, is actually that's probably why. So we've had to do a lot of static shift briefing and a lot of emphasis on when you come on Tuesday, in fact every day, brief you guys, don't take it as if that hazard is it's gone. Point of work risk assessment is we've brought in as well. You've got to do a risk assessment. Don't rely on your task brief. Don't rely on your method statement. Go and do an assessment before you brief your guys, and then give a good brief, as if it's the first job you've ever done. And we're doing that, and I'm seeing a lot of good benefit from that. But yeah, again, come off a little bit. It takes me back. It takes me to now, as I said, what we've mentioned about myself in general, of coming out of the army, Freightliner, and just the whole thing of once I had this sort of 6 months of being in a bit of doing training, doing qualifications, and I had an interview from Balfour Beatty, so I seen a job interview, and what, again, if there's any person who watches this who's in the army, who's looking at a bit of advice, one of the things you do, and I think we all naturally do it, is we look at what we're on currently earning. If I'm being honest, you say, for example, I'm on X amount, and you just look at a job that is X amount of money in the same, because you're quite used to it, and you think to yourself, and I think a lot of mistake, and I made the mistake, I sold myself short. No disrespect to the job that I'd done. Started off as a labour manager working for Balfour Beatty, and that was end of 2012-ish. And the reason that I took the job, and this was a strange thing as well, that when I went and seen the CEO and I said, look, I'm going to go down and I'm going to take this job, can I take the job? Can I agree it? Can I sign on the dotted line? She went, yeah, go for it. We can't stop you. You will be getting made redundant anytime soon anyway, so just go for it. So signed all the paperwork, took this job on, and it was funny, the job was advertised in London. And I went on an interview, and I was thinking to myself, oh yeah, I can work in London, I can handle that. I was living in Bicester, I bought a house in Bicester. The interview, I remember going in like a good soldier, 30 minutes before, because you had to recce where you were going, you had to go in there, you had to sort of sneak in and leopard crawl down the corridor just to have a look at what was going on and get a gist for how it was all working. I didn't leopard crawl, by the way, mate, I'm only joking that. But you go in and you scope the area, don't you? And here's me all suited and booted. I'm glad I didn't march in, but I was close to it. Sat there for half an hour beforehand, and I remember watching a guy when I was scoping it all out, going in, he went into this interview room, and I was there half an hour beforehand, probably about an hour, 45 minutes. I'm thinking, this is, an hour and a bit. And I was like, this isn't professional. I'm looking at my watch going, it's, 5 minutes before, good soldier, you know what I mean? You should be ready. I should be interviewed by now. And this guy comes out, and you sort of nod and you nod back. And I went in. After 5 minutes, it was like, no further questions. I've not got any further questions. Thanks for coming. When you think to yourself, oh, and I'd started off and tell us about yourself, very much what you said there. And I didn't obviously go back to when I was a young kid and all that. But I told him about my military career I said it was 5 minutes, Blair. It wasn't. It was probably more like 30 minutes. But I told him about my career, and I remember looking at him, and he just said to me, "Wow, didn't know that." And then he asked me a couple of things. Would you work weekends? And I went, "Well, if you want to send me on 6-month tours across to Afghanistan, I'm quite happy to do that. So I'm quite happy to work a weekend. Would you consider, working away? Yeah, not a problem." So as I was walking out, I remember phoning my wife, and she said, "How did you get on?" I said, "I've flunked this. The guy was in there for an hour and a half before me." I said, "I've only spent I said 5 minutes. I said, "I've only spent 5 minutes. Nah, I've got no chance." So as I was just about to get in my car, my phone rang, and the guy was like, "Have you left yet?" And I said, "No." He said, "Can you come back in for 2 minutes?" Went back in, and he offered me the job on the spot. And I was like, "Wow." So yeah, it was a labour manager for Alpha Beta Rail in Anglia, and this is the point. I was thinking, Anglia, that's a strange one in London. So got you get the laptop and the phone and all that sort of stuff, and you're told to report to London. And I'd done a bit of induction, bit of training for a couple of days. And I remember going in, seeing the guy who hired me. He said, "That's you all set now, mate. You pick your car up, you report to Ipswich on Monday." I was like, "Where did Ipswich come from?" He's like, "Well, that was the job, mate. Real, labour manager Anglia. You think it's going to be in London?" I was like, "Oh, the post of a job spec said London." He went, "Yeah, but I'm based in London, mate. You're not. You're up in Ipswich." I was like, "Okay." Then I had the thing of, I just took a job on, I've just accepted it, and I'm on my way now to, starting on Monday, I had to drive to Anglia, to Ipswich from Bicester, which I don't know if anybody's done that route. It was basically down the M40, M25, and onto the horrible, horrible thing called the A12, up to Colchester, up to Ipswich. I had to leave, done a bit of a combat assessment, shall we say, and I had to leave at 5 o'clock in the morning to beat the traffic, especially on the M25. And I didn't leave realistically until about 5, 6 o'clock at night to then stop the traffic. All in all, I was doing 17, 18 hours. Looking at it now, again, if you look at fatigue policy, if you look at door-to-door policy, we have 14-hour door-to-door on the railway. Fatigue assessment, fatigue risk assessment, shall we say, I would have been off the scale. At the time, again, a lesson learned, but coming from a career in the army, you do as you're told and you just get on with it. But at the same time, Alpha B realised that, they recognised that after a certain couple of months, and they offered me, stay in a hotel, every now and again. But at the same time, it was difficult because my partner, she was becoming a midwife, so she was going through training. So anyway, it was one of them where there's a little bit of boo-boo, but at the same time, and the reason I say I joined as a labour manager, fantastic job though. And the reason I say it was a fantastic job was I'm trying to find my feet because I've just spent 20 years in the military. I expected when I asked a guy to pick a shovel up, he would pick that shovel up and he would shovel that and he would dig that hole to the best of his ability in record time because I've told him to do it. And my first day on site, when I told the guy to pick a shovel up and dig a hole, he told me to F off because he's not paid to dig a hole, he's a crane controller, and he threw the shovel back at me. So that was my first realisation that actually it's a different setup, and I thought to myself at the time, can I make him, put ballast down his trousers and tell him to run up and down, for 700 metres until he fell over? Probably couldn't do that, so I had to accept that. So it was a bit of a learning curve on day one. And then the second day, we had a renewal, and I was labour manager. I didn't have any training. It was pretty much one of the renewals managers sat me next to me and showed me for a day how the whole labour system operates and how you ordered staff. And I remember actually I got my head around it quite quickly. And then we had a big renewal. I can't remember what job it was. Could have been Tottenham Hale. So I joined on a Monday in the big core weekend, 52-hour block. I think it was about 1,000 odd yards of plain line renewal. I didn't know much. I thought, yeah, happy days. As I thought, I had ordered all the manpower. So we had core gangs, which were rostered. I had a rostering clerk who would do all the rostering, so I didn't have to worry about that. But I had to worry about the plant and the welfare and various other stuff and the labour. And you go into the system and you press a button and you speak to the labour suppliers that you use to say, I need X amount of men. And they say, yeah, not a problem, Dave, we'll supply it. And I press the button. My mistake was when it goes out to inquiry, you've got to then press another button to send it to order. And I didn't because nobody told me. So I'd left all these, you're talking about maybe 500 guys, all in different jobs all around Anglia, to basically say, I'm on inquiry. And these guys, I look back on it, did they use it as to their advantage? And I'll come on to that why in a second, or did they just think we don't need them? I don't know. But remember going home on the Friday. I was quite chuffed that I'd, came into this role and I'd met a couple of guys, and I think to myself, yeah, I can work here. It's a decent little gig, this. And they said, oh, you're on call this weekend. I said, okay, I'll do that, not a problem. Friday night, I was thinking to myself, I'm on call, so I'll get myself to bed early just in case. I don't know what this on call means, but I'm sure it's nothing. And I remember watching a film at 10 o'clock at night. I thought, yeah, I'll go to bed now. Into bed, 10:30, phone rings. I'm thinking, I wonder who this is. And there was one of the site managers. And I had 5 minutes of verbal abuse. Where's my staff? Where's this? Where's that? We've got nothing on site. I've got 4 guys. I'm cutting out in a minute, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, it's all ordered, mate. Not a problem. It's done. He says, right, said, have a look, phone the supplier. So I phoned this guy who really good mates with now, phoned him and said, where's your guys? I need a cost plus 10 on this, kicking off at 23.59. You haven't ordered any staff, mate. I was like, what? I said, you haven't ordered any staff? And I was ranting. I was like, I tell you, mate, I've got the evidence here. He went, has it got an E next to it or has it got an O? I was like, yeah, it's got an E. Why? You've not ordered them. I haven't ordered them. So we went, my first job, setting the standard as a labour manager. And that weekend, I didn't order any staff. Major rail renewal, they'd already cut the track out. So we'd already made that sort of disc cutter or that burner had came out. I managed to order the burners, which was good. And that wasn't too bad. But burners came out, I'd burned the track, we'd started to panel out because the site manager, being the site manager, thought, I haven't got staff, but I can cope with the 5 guys that I've got on site with the machines. And I was like, oh my God. So this guy I spoke to said, look, I can get you blokes, but you need to give me a bit of time. And I spent probably that whole weekend planning the resource and getting resource to site. And I was going, and I think the reason I said, did they play it to their advantage? Because the conversations that I was having was, Dave, if you want these guys on site, you can't just do a one single shift, mate. You're going to have to pay them 2 shifts to come. That type scenario. And I was like, okay, just do it. Just send them. I've got to get this job done. And I remember it was a chaos. I had maybe 3 hours kept. And when you're on call, when you were doing the labour manager role, we were also, I was in Anglia, we had Tunbridge and we had Eastleigh. I wasn't really responsible for the labour at Tunbridge and Eastleigh, but you were on call. So any issues that you had with labour. Tunbridge had a massive meltdown that weekend as well. And their labour manager had forgot to order staff. And Eastleigh went through a very similar situation, not necessarily with the ordering of the staff, but just staff didn't show up. So I spent my first on-call weekend, probably I would have got about 3 hours kept.
Jeez.
Shall I say? I didn't bat an eyelid. Yeah, I thought I hadn't passed the job. I remember driving in on Monday, and my phone was going, but I was thinking, well, I can't answer the phone because I'm driving. So I'm driving along, and I went to Colchester first because I wanted to say thanks to the labour manager who was helping me out with the manpower. Walked into the office. They were like, "You need to ring work, mate." I said, "Why? What's up?" He said, "We think you've canned it." I said, "No, I'm all right. I'll go in a minute. I just need to say thanks." But so I rang. They're like, "Where are you? Where are you? Really concerned?" I said, "I'm coming in a minute. I'll be in. I'll just nipping in to say give my thanks." "Oh, that's all right then. That's all right. We thought you'd binned it after the weekend." So I came into the office, and it all became apparent where the guy who I took over from lasted 2 months. He was ex-military, ex-RAF. No, I'm not going to say anything about RAF and Army. We won't go there, mate.
Don't start that argument.
I'm not going to go there. But I thought maybe he was used to he wanted a 5-star hotel, mate, maybe in Anglia, maybe, I don't know. But anyway.
You set up all of the ex-RAF and serving RAF people now.
I'm not going to take any away from it, but yeah, I think he had a very similar experience, shall we say, and he decided, well, he left his phone and computer on the desk on the weekend, whereas I came in on the Monday, didn't bat an eyelid, and I think everybody gave me a bit of respect then straight away to say, well, this guy hasn't jumped ship and shot off. But I was talking about the stress and lack of sleep, and I also found out the guy. So you had the RAF guy who had spent 2 weeks in the job, packed it in. The guy who he took over from had a heart attack. He was working on a job for 2 years. He stated that he had a heart attack because of the stress of the job. So I'm starting to think to myself now, wow, this is something that obviously we're not going to tell you when the interview you. Well, by the way, Dave, guy quit 2 weeks ago because of the job and all that sort of stuff. But it gets you thinking then of how far we've came as well, though, with well-being, stress management, as I said, and fatigue. And again, I'll go to present company who I'm with, with Morgan Sindel, especially, I work for the rail department with Morgan's, and we've got someone who I hold in very high regard with regards to how she develops our well-being, and she's been a bit of a conduit to mental health. And yeah, the stuff that she's done that I've seen bore witness in the last 2 years, I think she's fantastic on well-being and mental health. And when you look at it, if you had that type of individual, and that type of thought process back in 2012, 2013, and I've seen it quite a lot, if I'm being really honest with you, mate, in that environment. There was a lot of guys going off with stress, there was a lot of pressure. Being in a railway, you work in possession, time is your biggest foe. And what I started to realise, especially with myself, I started to get a lot more involved in the health and safety aspect of dealing with these guys, and the welfare and the well-being of the guys, and leadership and developing these individuals. But mainly, I started doing site reports and safety tours, which actually, when you see the job description, it did say carry out a safety tour. But I made sure I'd done a safety tour at least once a week. For me, wasn't part. It was. I think it said once a month. I didn't. I actually done probably about 2 or 3 a week, and not only on days, not only on nights, not only on weekends. I started to do it in the office because I thought, well, and no due respect to the guy who was doing that role at the time, he was a fantastic bloke and I learned a lot from him. But I felt that he needed a bit of hand, because every time I seen him, he was always cutting about the place, dealing with accidents or incidents and that sort of stuff. And I didn't really understand his role at the time, but I always thought he needed a bit of a hand. And he recognised that, and he said to me, "Are you a health and safety guy, mate?" I said, "Well, you could say I am, but I'm doing a labour manager's role, so I didn't want to step on his toes." At the same time, I had that bit of respect. But I ended up helping him a lot, doing safety tours, on-site tours, and we worked very well together. And I developed a lot of strategies and that around that, and it got me into that thought process of actually labour manager or health and safety. I started to think about that. At the same time, I was only a labour manager for three months. I got a promotion. I became, would I call it a promotion? I became a logistics manager, also a labour manager, because the guy who was in control of the depot, in control of rail renewals in Anglia, he said to me, one day he just sat me down, and remember what I said to you about knowing your people. He was very good at that. He'd come in, tell me about yourself. I told him the stories about rail and the army. He said, "You're wasted in that role, mate. You're wasted in being a labour manager role." And he's seen that potential. He actually mentioned a thing called the PC manager. And I was thinking to myself at the time, PC, it must be politically correct. And I thought to myself, he doesn't know me then, really, if I'm being honest. But I thought to myself, okay, I'll take what you're saying, but yeah, I'm happy. But he said, I am going to put you in logistics as well. So not only can you do labour, I also want you to do the logistics. I also want you to do plant. I also want you to do welding. And actually, while you're at it, can you do the depot thing as well? And the health and safety guys leaving us soon. Would you mind just helping out, because you've been doing that anyway? And I said, yes. I said, yeah, no problem. Bit of lesson learned. There was no discussions on wage rises or anything like that. I just done it because, again, military told, do it, crack on. There's no, you're doing it for the benefit of, because your boss is telling you, I need a hand or I need this. So yeah, I ended up doing a range of different things: logistics, health and safety, and the labour. So I pretty much got involved in my understanding from going from not. I knew a lot about renewals, if I'm being honest with you, because in the army I built tracks in Kosovo. We used to do training down in all the the only training we could get, because we couldn't go on network rail infrastructure, was all the preserved railways.
Yeah.
So we used to do a lot of renewals down there. And I can drive a steam locomotive, because that was part of your thing, is if you come along and renew my track for me, we'll allow you training to drive a steam loco. And all the buffies, I'll be honest with you, and we had a lot of train spotters in that squadron. Personally, I wasn't a train spotter. I liked it. I got a bit of a buzz from it, but I was a bit like, yeah, it's another, I can drive a steam locomotive. Woo! Yeah, great. But actually, part of that understanding was when I got promoted later on in life, there was always the understanding of going to Africa. If there was any humanitarian aid, if you look at Rwanda and stuff, certain things that have happened in the past, there was an exercise to get us trained up to drive steam locomotives just in case of Africa, or I think Russia possibly was mentioned as well.
Yeah.
The fact that they still had steam locomotives in operation. So military railmen, get yourself across here, jump on the infrastructure and start driving your steam locomotives. So that was part of it. So yeah, I always had a good understanding of how it all works. But as I said, you've got to learn the job, haven't you? You've got to ask people, you've got to hang around with the supervisors, the trackmen. I was even hanging about with site access, and I always used to ask, and I was really interested in what makes everything all come together. I mean, what makes it all work, especially with I start to see things, possibly, I'll call it a fresh eyes approach. A guy coming into an establishment, with my experience, I would then look at fatigue management, would be one of the big things. I was doing rostering, and I was thinking to myself, we're paying these guys, and these guys are doing 79 hours a week. I then spoke to the guys who were doing the rostering, saying, is there something I can put in place that would stop them at a certain amount of time? Because legally, we can only work a certain amount of time. Great idea. So we then produced a fatigue management system into the rostering. So if you try to roster and drag a guy in to do a shift, it wouldn't allow you if he's done his hours. And also, it wouldn't allow you if he hadn't done his 12-hour rest in between. So there's little things like that I started to bring in. There was, from again, safety, I became this guy who realistically ran a lot of stuff. And round about, I would say 2014, I actually went for an interview with Alpha Beta in an enhancements role as a safety manager. And I got interviewed internally. There was a bit of, well, you shouldn't be doing it, but we'll give you an interview. And I don't know, well, they said to me at the time, put it this way, I didn't get the job. They said I wasn't qualified enough. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, that's a bit of a kick in the backside. I also think it was due to, I remember the head of safety was doing the interview, and one of his opening questions was, and I think it didn't help me, mate, and I think that's probably why I didn't get the job. He said to me, you're a health and safety guy on site. I'm working on site, and I've not got my hat on. I forgot it. I've not got my glasses, and I've not got my gloves. What are you going to do about it? And I said, can you just tell me what your job role is again? He said, I'm head of safety for Alpha Beta renewals. I said, okay, so if you ever walked onto a work site without your hat and your glasses and your gloves, I'd be embarrassed if I was you. You know what I mean? I said, you're head of safety. I would be seriously considering not working for you, if I'm being honest. And if that's the question you're asking me, I don't know if I want to work for you in the first place. However, I'll understand that you're my boss and blah, blah, blah. And I didn't know, all that stuff. And the guy who was next to him, I think he was the new enhancements PM, he spat his tea out. And he actually said that's one of the best answers I've ever heard on these interviews. And I thought, I'm starting to get a bit confident. I was like, I'm, getting a good impression here. The next thing he said to me was his next question. And I remember him looking at his notes, and he turned his book over and he went, okay, can you tell me section 5, paragraph 17 of the Health and Safety at Work Act, what is it? And I was like, excuse me, and he said, tell me section 5, chapter 17, what is it? What's your take on that? And I was like, I don't know. So if I'm being really honest with you, I haven't got a clue. And he said, well, I'll tell you what it is. He said, it's this. But as he was telling me, it wasn't eye to eye. He was like reading from his book. And I was like, I thought I'm in the wrong interview here, and I said that to him. And maybe, as I said, I said I wasn't qualified enough. I think it was the defining moment was I said, you're after the wrong guy. If I can quote chapter and verse from the Health and Safety at Work Act, then if that's who you're after the wrong guy. And I said, personally, I think being a health and safety manager on site isn't about quoting paragraph and verse of the Health and Safety at Work Act. It's about mentoring people, it's about coaching people, raising awareness, it's about engaging, it's about, and I went, I had a bit of a rant of what my take on being a health and safety practitioner is. And I think that was a defining moment where I thought I had a bit of confidence. Now it wasn't going that well. They responded back saying I wasn't qualified enough, shall I say. In a way, I took that, I wouldn't say I took it to heart, but I took it as a lesson learned. And the reason I say that, I did have all my NEBOSH, as I say to you, certificates coming out my eyeballs. But I was nothing to do with IOSH at the time. I hadn't looked at IEMA, I hadn't looked at anything like that. And that's one of the things he quoted. You haven't got, IOSH, you haven't got IEMA. And they spoke about this NEBOSH diploma. And I thought to myself, okay, that's a fair one. So as you would do, you look at it and you think, well, that's my career progression. I want to be a health and safety guy. I want to work in the railway as a health and safety guy. So I had to do it to an extent. And what I've learned with IOSH is fantastic. When you're doing CPD, I'm now doing IPD. I've sat on it, and you've probably seen my message. I've got a good mentor. She will kick my backside if I don't get it done by Easter. But I think it's really important, and the reason I say it's really important is, one, when I talk about interviews that we've had, and people will look at that, people and clients nowadays, it's really important now, especially when we do bids, and especially when we look at work winning. The clients are more and more asking for chartered membership of IOSH for your safety professional, IEMA, and various other, they call it competence, shall we say. So to me, it is really important now. And I will admit, I probably 6-7 years ago, I thought it means nothing to me, it's just another tick in the box. But it's not just about that, it is about reflection and personal development. And I've always found, especially, and I love it as well, networking. So, Metropolitan branch in London, I've put on a couple of things.
Branches, isn't it? Yeah, I've visited them a few times when I've been working in London.
I've met people that work for ITV and Netflix, and it makes you want to go and join Netflix, the stories that they tell you, because you can go and travel the world and do all these stunts and stuff in ITV. And it's amazing that, you're in this little bubble, and it's a good awareness of what does go on generally within health and safety. And I think that's the best thing about IOSH, and you met branch meetings and stuff. And I also took a tour. I took them to King's Cross, where, and we had an IOSH event, and it gave them, a big eye opener. And it's something that I will do in future. To COVID, we'll come on to COVID in a bit. What's stopping us doing online, like we're doing now? I can take you on a Teams, put my iPad or a GoPro on, and go and do a live safety tour of King's Cross. I do it now with Network Rail. I go every week because I don't want people coming to site. I put, one of the guys, he had a golf trolley, and he put an iPad, fixed the iPad to the golf trolley, and carried it around with him. To an extent, I thought that was a bit, it was a good idea, a good bit of innovation, but I'm more GoPro or some live link, to wear on the helmet, or just carry an iPad around. And I've seen quite good success from that, and I'll come on to as well some of the things I've brought in PC, and with using CCTV to an advantage to an extent. So, promotion through Balfour Beatty, I became his logistics manager, and as I said, in the back of his mind, we were talking about PC. And I also remember I went for a job interview with Balfour's, didn't get it. Went back to doing labour manager, but the commute was proper killing me. There was also a thing called RT24, and we lost out. RT24 and Colas came in to take over in Anglia, and it probably gave me the decision. Although, to be fair to Colas, they were more than willing to help me and with the commute and various other stuff. I just found it as a bit of an opportunity to branch away and actually to develop my career as a health and safety professional practitioner, whatever you want to call it. And just for the record, I call myself a health and safety practitioner. You know, that's what I say. Just to, and we'll come on to that in a bit as well. But so yeah, I went that side, and ever since I've not looked back really. Apart from, as we will mention it, I took a short break to try and get into electrification, overhead line. And then my old boss rang me up and said, remember that conversation we had when you left Balfours and you didn't want to join Colas and you didn't want to troop you over? Do you want to come back and work for Balfours as the PC manager? And honestly, mate, I still, till the day I tipped up to have the sort of chat and the interview, I still thought it was to do with political correctness or some HR type thing. And I didn't really do much research into it. I thought, and then when I got there, it wasn't really an interview. It was, you're the guy for the job. We want you to come and work for us. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'm happy. Let's discuss. And I was thinking at the time, PC, what's this PC? And then they mentioned it, principal contractor. I was like, I know what that is. Principal contractor manager. So it was one of them that you take the leap of faith. Yeah.
It's quite a unique role in the rail industry as well. Can you just explain for the people that will maybe see this that don't have an understanding of what a PC manager does, what the role is actually about?
So if we take CDM and we go back prior to 2015, there was a role called the CDM coordinator. After CDM, I went through a bit of a rethink and a refurbish. In 2015, they got rid of that type of role and we had the role of the principal designer and principal contractor. Within the railway, might not be throughout construction, but definitely within the rail environment, one of the main, or your tier one contractors are all principal contractors who work on the railway. When you have multiple contractors working within one project, you will always have a lead principal contractor. And on the days of the West Outer, I was West Outer for Crossrail when I took the role on as principal contractor manager, and we had a guy in Carillion who was on the inner working as a principal contractor manager. And at that time, it was thought of best practice. Carillion were running this role, and the role of the principal contractor manager basically is assurance for the CDM as a principal contractor. And then there's fundamentals to being a principal contractor. Access arrangements and having access to the railway infrastructure, which you can split down into making sure that people get access, making sure that they're safe, got welfare provisions, various other stuff, security, make sure that nobody can get into the infrastructure. There's also, when I talk about access, is integration of work. So if you think about it, and it happens all the time, I had 12 miles of railway. And every time you would have a meeting with 5 or 6 major contractors, it's guaranteed 100% everyone wanted to work in the same area. Yeah, apart from the odd couple. So you had to then integrate the works with each other. So that was having integration meetings, to then basically go through a system where everybody knew what everybody else was doing. So that was a major part of it. That's not technically health and safety, is it? That's rail possessions, that's looking at integration. The key to that, and one of my things I was very strong on, was then the health and safety element of it, was the assurance. So I employed PC site managers, as we called them, to go out, guys who were actually site managers who had done electrification or track renewals or any discipline that we were doing on the project. I would get these guys to do your assurance. So they would be your guys who would go to the contractors doing the work and say, can I please have a look at your task brief and just make sure that you're doing the work as you're saying you're doing. They would stop for any safety issues. They would raise close calls. They would encourage people to raise close calls. But there was a lot of training that I had to go, because when I first took that job on, I told these guys to go out there and do what I wanted them to do, but we found that safety conversation wasn't really happening. So when I would go out on site, I would have the safety conversation, and actually people would always say to me, I love when you have a chat with me, because I walk away feeling like empowered, I can do stuff, but also I walk away knowing what I've done wrong. Whereas your guys, as you call them at the time, just tell me and bollock me to an extent. And so I had to do a bit of training with that. But also, PC manager wise, not just health and safety, because part of being a principal contractor is communication. That's key, and your health and safety. So making sure that every contractor, every person that walks through that front gate is well aware of site rules. Induction is also massive then. You've got to produce a good induction pack to then induct everybody. You've got to monitor that. You've got to monitor qualifications. But on this job, it was slightly different because we call it a hub and spoke. So I had Balfour Beatty, Vinci, Telent. There was many tier 1 contractors working under this project. So I became a principal contractor manager in this hub and spoke model. So you were more aligned to Network Rail than you were for Balfour Beatty themselves. So we had to treat Balfour Beatty, my own company, as a contractor, and we called them nominated contractors. So that was a bit strange because there's me, and if I've done the job now twice in major projects, and the thing I always say is your most hated guy in your company. And it is, unfortunately, and I say that in a jovial way. It's not, because they see the benefit from it, but sometimes your own company see you as, and I have had to do it, I'm unfortunate, I've had to stop work sometimes because it's been totally unsafe, to then have a good workshop, a good discussion with them, how we're going to improve going forward, a bit like an improvement notice as such. And it's not nice. It's not nice doing that to your own company, but we'll go on to why I think I'm quite successful in that role, because of integrity to an extent, and you do the right thing. And the way I've always seen it is, doesn't matter if you're Carillion, Balfour Beatty, on that job, I treat you all as equals. And I think that's why the client liked it and I was successful doing it, and still am successful doing it, is that's how I take the role. So yeah, the role itself isn't just about health and safety, it's about logistics, it's about, but I do employ a nucleus of guys working for me, but at the same time, I've got to know, like anything else, you're accountable. I'm the principal contractor rep for the project. I go through a series of audits to make sure I'm competent to do that role. And one of the things I'm really, really proud of is when I started to do the role, Carillion were doing it for 9 months prior, and the role was quite new, hub and spoke. So there was this role of principal contractor manager. And I started to bring in a lot of good stuff, let's be honest. One of the first things I done, so Carillion would have 4 or 5 different signing in points. And you guys had to drive 6 miles to go and sign in, to then drive 6 miles to another station to, and I thought,
and the same again at the end of the shift to sign out.
Yeah. And I thought to myself, so I remember when I was setting it all up, I did speak with Carillion a lot, and I was thinking to myself, so when I was putting this, and the guy who I took over from, because basically they wanted me to do the job because Balfours were close to, I would say not failing, but we were close to not getting the role, if you know what I mean. He had adopted that same thing, 5 sign-in points across 12 miles. I had a guy in West Drayton, for example, having to drive to Maidenhead and to sign in, to then drive back to the inside. And I remember sitting there going, fatigue alone, not just about fatigue. This is just, in a way I did think about it as efficiencies and savings. So carbon reduction and little things like that. I was thinking, do you know what? We could get a good news story out of this. And I came up with a thing called a control centre. And it was one office with staff working on it, like a call centre. And people would sign in over the phone, because again, and I'll come on to it in a bit, why should I babysit supervisors? Because the supervisor should be checking PPE. The supervisor should be doing the brief. The supervisor should be signing these guys, doing sentinel checks and various other stuff. Although as a principal contractor, I still do. But I like putting that accountability onto the people that should be doing it, if you know what I mean. So that was one of the questions raised, is how can you check PPE? How can you do this? How can you do that? And I thought, well, it's easy. You know what I mean? That's the supervisor, that's his role, and when you speak to the individuals and that, and when you speak to the companies, they loved it. They loved signing in from the station because they knew that they didn't have to drive 6 miles, as a workforce. And some of them, bizarrely enough, were driving in their own individual vehicles. So you had, sometimes 12 cars driving up and then driving back. It was just, it was madness. So I developed a control centre, and then that grew arms and legs, because we ended up having an incident response centre. So when, yourself in the rail industry, site access SCO for Network Rail, you have to have a strong link with these guys. So when you report incidents, you've got to get on the phone. And we found a really good, brilliant way of interacting with SCO, with incident reporting and various other stuff. And I found a quick way of issuing what we call flash alerts. So within 5 minutes, you would get a phone call, we've had an incident. Probably about 20 minutes after that, a lot of people knew that we'd had an incident. And the reason I'd done that, and I thought, was because we're covering 12 miles, we could have the same work activities happening mileage. Yeah. And if somebody has an incident working on a ladder, for example, although we ban ladders, if somebody's got, say, working on an incident and they've had an incident with a ladder, somebody else could be working on a ladder on that same shift somewhere else. And we started to see that happen straight away as well, as people knew about it straight away, and actually people would take the ladder down and go and get someone else to go and work with. So there's a lot of good practice on that. The close calls that we were putting in, positive interventions as we call them, whatever you want to call them, we went from on average 100 a month to 400, 500 a month with the PC, with the site managers. Again, you could argue that we were taking away that from the contractors working on the job, but at the same time, I put it back to the contractors as a challenge. I said, well, if I'm going to, it's a bit like Alex Ferguson, if you're going to score 2 goals, we will score 4 goals type analogy. That's what I used to say to them. I'm going to raise close calls because I need to, because it helps us, with Planet, it helps us get that trend. It helps us to be that reactive part of the health and safety as a principal contractor. If I'm going to raise 20, what are you going to do about it? And they would, it wasn't a numbers game, Blair. That's not what I'm saying. It didn't turn into a numbers game. It turned into taking ownership. And what I started to do is I started to see close calls that my guys were putting in get to 0, and job done. That's what I wanted. I wanted the workforce to raise the close calls, not me, not the principal contractor team. So I seen that as a good win. And a good thing about that is, especially with close calls, is the more we report the trends that we get, we start to implement a lot of good practice. And another thing I'll put in is working at height was a massive issue. I had working at height, not with the work activities itself, but with deliveries. And I would say I averaged about 40 to 50 working at height incidents on that project in my first 3 months. And that was with either delivery drivers jumping up on the back of flatbeds, RRV deliveries jumping on the back and jumping up there. And especially when you're on track and off tracking machines, there was a lot of issues with trailers, people jumping on there as well. So what I've done, and again, maybe a bit of innovation, just a thought process. I needed security anyway on access points and various other stuff. So I spoke to a supplier and I said, with this CCTV, could I log into it myself and just have a look, on the CCTV, especially at the access points? And we set up a system where you can log in. And again, I go to the control center. We employed, a site manager to observe CCTV on his shift. And the reason I said that is I can't have, we had sometimes 20, 30 work groups out at the same time. And you can't have one guy driving up and down, checking everybody. So I had 2 guys, one guy in the control center and one guy on the phone, on the radio. If he seen someone, he could quickly, a bit like rapid reaction, off you go, because you need to go and intervene. But at the same time, because we had a booking in system, we could phone the guy as he's just about to climb on top of that trailer, phone the guy and say, excuse me, mate, can you don't do it? We're watching you, can you stay, don't jump on that trailer, you need to put your follow arrest system up. You could see him, he would get a thumbs up, go and put his follow arrest system out, whether it's whatever he had on, and go and do it. And part of doing it that way, we went from, as I said, 40 to 50 working at height. Bearing in mind these are incidents, so you've got to do investigations, you've got to look at lessons learned and various other stuff. We went from 40 to 50 to 1 a month if you were lucky. To me, that's brilliant. That's that reaction that I keep saying to you, that lesson learned, and how you can try and use a bit of technology at the same time to manage, because you can be everywhere. And we talk about challenges, from a health and safety perspective. People, I wouldn't say it's a challenge. I think you know, if we look at the vast amount of incidents, two things I would look at is the behaviours of people and the planning. But again, I'll come on to that, no doubt, when you ask me about your challenges. That's one of the things I sort of gave it away. But yeah, so the PC, I'm hoping I've explained the sort of role of principal contractor. A lot is to do with assurance, and there is a lot of assurance that goes on there. There is also the responsibility of being a principal contractor on the railway. As I've said to you quite near the start, one of the things that I've not really grasped yet is the role of a principal designer and where they sit with PC. You do look at CDM regs, and CDM regs tells you that you should be having regular meetings with principal designers, and you should be, you know, not holding them to account, but you should be, you know, and vice versa, and the client. I do feel that client-wise, we're brilliant. You know, the relationships we have with Network Rail, with London Underground, and a PC role is fantastic. The relationship between PC and PD, I think there's still work to do on that. I think there is a bit of work to do on that, and I'm trying my best in this role now to try and get that relationship a bit stronger. On the King's Cross Modern job I'm on now, the role of PD is done by the client, by Network Rail, and I've seen a lot of progress, a lot of good progress. And compare the principal contractor role I'm on now to the West Outer role, I've never really done anything called hazard transfer, so CDM hazard transfer and stuff from the PD to the PC. I'm doing that now, and that's been an eye-opener. You know, taking new structures that you're putting up and transferring that as a hazard onto a PC risk instead of a PD risk. So we have come a long way. So I'm not saying there's, you know, there isn't a. It's not that the role is developing. I still think there's a lot to do, especially safety and design, and especially pre-grip. We call it grip 3, grip 5 in certain jobs. I think if a PC gets more involved in more of the safety, and I would say that in any job, not necessarily on a PC role, safety-wise, I want to see more safety people in these IDCs, in design meetings, with the designers. We might not have much input into it all, especially when you get a group of engineers together. It's fantastic listening sometimes, but sometimes you don't get a word in edgeways. But there's always that, and I've done it a few times. I've been in engineering IDCs and various sort of stuff, and I've asked something, and I'll give that back to one of my jobs that I've done with talent. So if I come away from the PC thing anyway to one of the jobs that I've done, because I left Alphabet in that role, because I wanted to gain a bit of experience. As I keep saying to you, Blair, I think myself, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I spent a couple of years on a job and I want to progress, or I want to go and do something different because I don't want to stagnate. At the same time, maybe it's a bad thing. I don't know. I've still not, you know, nobody's told me it's good or bad. In every job that I do, you know, I seem to do okay. But that's open to question, shall we say? Is it a good or is it a bad thing? But one of the things that I was lacking on was experience in the London Underground. And I always thought to myself, I remember days in the army, I went and worked for 7 months with the Underground because there was a plan put in place. If we had any issues, any mass casualty evacuation in London, we could have used Underground as a military. And part of my role would have been to take the army guys and drive the Underground trains up and down the stations. That never came to anything. But I remember thinking to myself, I've always been keen to be an all-rounded health and safety practitioner in the rail industry. It's not just about working with Network Rail, it's looking at overground, it's looking at Docklands, it's looking at the Underground. So I went and took a job with talent. They were working on the Underground, and they were installing media screens.
Yeah.
And that goes bizarrely away from doing renewals and OLE and station development and piling and all this stuff that I'm, you know, really strong on, to electrical install. And the reason I say that is, and it's again my offering to an extent, when I say about being a subject matter expert to an extent, stick to what you know to an extent, but at the same time, let's try something different. Let's do something different, because you need to expand your knowledge. You know, look at something that you're weak on. And I would say, from an electrical installation point of view, that was one of my key weaknesses, shall I say, on that. You know, I'm an expert. I'm not saying I'm an expert nowadays, but you know, I know a lot now because I challenged myself and I went, you know what, I'm going to go and do this job. I've got a vast amount of experience in the rail. Underground, I had a slight bit of experience, and fair play to talent to give me the opportunity. We've seen the potential, and within 2-3 weeks, I was up and running anyway. But again, sitting with strong individuals who asked questions, I asked them. Maybe they thought I was not experienced enough. Maybe they thought, you know, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. But I've seen it as just learn, learn about the job, so then and study as well, and look at, you know, policies, procedures, so on and so forth. And quickly, I found my feet quite easily. And that job was fantastic. Working with the underground, TFL, it brought more knowledge with regards to environmental aspects and how we deal with TFL and certain TFL working practices. And I worked a lot on Crossrail as well. So we done every single Crossrail station. We put in media screens in all the stations. And it's funny, I had to do 7 inductions in 2 days with every station. And I remember always thinking to myself, with inductions, you have to do DNA testing. So that means providing a urine sample. And I remember we used to do, as part of the army, used to do CDT, I think it was called. And you never wanted to be that guy that stood in the corner not being able to pee. I remember after my 4th induction in one day, I was that guy, unfortunately, who stood in the corner having to drink loads of water because I couldn't pee. And strange, but we had to do, and that's what, then again, I spoke to Crossrail and I was thinking, well, what? And it puts you on a bit of, later on in life, if you have multiple stations, then why don't we just do a core induction and, you know, and then separate station inductions once you join or something like that? You know, we could have saved a lot of valuable time and effort. But saying that, all inductions were very good, which put me on the King's Cross job. When we put induction together, I learned a lot from that, and I put a very good induction package together. But the talent job and installation of media screens, I go back to what I said about the PD element. We were installing large TV screens really in the underground, 60-inch, 75-inch, and there was one 120-inch. I think we had to install, I don't know the numbers, but these were big screens. I think they were 198 kilograms. Mm-hmm. So I remember getting them from Italy, getting them into the depot, and I actually sat down and said, right, let's do a bit of a, because I couldn't get my head around it. I was doing manual handling risk assessments, thinking, how am I going to get this screen down an escalator all the way along to possibly walking, you know, 700, 800 meters along to a concourse to then install it, to lift it up and install it. Then I found out, and as people will know, when you're traveling down escalators, there's a weight limit, and the weight limit wasn't 190 kilograms. So with 4 people, 6 people, when we were trying to do the trials, to lift 198 kilograms with 4 people, you need to be big units. And it wasn't working, so we tried various ways of doing it, straps either side, 5 people one side, 5 people the other side. And we done a trial with TFL using an escalator. And this is it, again, this is what I say, sometimes you've got to fail sometimes to then be able to work out a solution. I remember with TFL, 5 guys on one side, 5 guys on the other, with this big massive 198 kilogram, 120-inch screen. And they were squeezed on like lemons either side of the escalator. I don't know why, but we came out with, let's start the escalator so they don't have to walk down. We can just get them flowing all the way down this nice escalator, and then we can stop it at the end. Brilliant in principle, brilliant in theory. We've got to look at Sir Isaac Newton and his theory of relativity or gravity or whatever it is. When you stop someone, it still pushes that individual forward. So when we chose to do the trial and these guys were coming down nice and slow, nice and controlled, we got to a point where we stopped the escalator. It was a jolt, which we didn't factor in. And I've seen 10 guys in a pile at the bottom of an escalator with screen. I don't know how much these screens cost, but that was firmly dropped on the floor, shall we say. But to be fair, as I said, yes, then you've got to go through the pain because it was an incident at the end of the day. We had to, you know, and I'll take ownership of that. And I was like, you know, we put together an idea, we had to do a trial, didn't work. my take on that was I listened to certain people to an extent because they were the input into it. It never felt right. So sometimes you've got to go with your instinct at times. And we ended up, cut a long story short, we ended up saying, let's go back and design. Let's go back and look at the design of it all. And I was involved in taking components out. So some of these batteries that we put, some of the gubbins that we put inside these screens, we managed to redesign. It went from 198 kilograms to still quite heavy, but about 165. One of the things that I looked at as well was a stair climber. So the normal stair climbers that you got, that you can use, mechanical stair climbers. Again, the biggest caveat to that was the escalated weight capacity. Again, we've done trials, usually I found with product acceptance within the railway and within the underground, I've seen sometimes 2 years it waits before you get anything accepted. Fair play to one of the senior construction managers within TfL. We pushed this and we got product acceptance in 2 weeks. And we still use it, and I think we still use it nowadays. I can't remember it. It's a stair climber basically. It's only for escalators, and we managed to, it suspends the load as such, so you don't get any sort of spread of load on the escalator steps itself, and it's operated by remote control, so there was no manual handling. So we managed to negate all the manual handling. We managed to negate the issues of getting the screen, and then we developed a table that came with the which actually mechanically lifted it up and onto the fixing it was on. And part of the design process as well was, instead of having it as one unit, we could design it so we could fit the base, like putting a TV bracket on the wall and then putting the screen on top. So there's a lot of, so it ended up coming in 2 parts as well. So to me, it's quite a success story of having a bit of innovation, but also working with a principal designer, working with design as a safety person to alleviate the manual handling risk. So we actually went from an incident to an extent to no manual handling at all for these units. So really good bit of work. Take quite personal pride in that. And again, I go back to I done my work, I done the project, and I went to Morgan Sindel, who I'm currently with now. And as I said, what a great move, what a fantastic move, fantastic company. Really, I think their take on health and safety is up another level to what I've had experience on in the past. Again, that's no disrespect with anybody I've worked with. It's the whole part of the whole construction, the whole industry anyway is ever evolving. So I think everybody else is evolving anyway. So, but at the same time, as I said to you, they have very good, especially in well-being, fantastic. And I'll take a lot away from it. But it's also one of the things that they have, and it's again something that I'll always take away with me. With health and safety, you've got to have a strategy to an extent, and we've got a thing that our head of safety produced, but again, it's not, and it's a good bit of recommendation as well. If you're in a position where you have to, implement strategy and stuff, don't do it in isolation. And the good thing that he did, he involved everybody in it, not just from a health and safety point of view. He went to the project leads, he went to certain people and said, right, I'm going to have to, I need a strategy for the year ahead. We need to measure ourselves. We need to, and he produced a thing called an Achieving Excellence Plan, which is 12, I would say 12 pillars, 12 things that we need to do. Won't go into great detail on it, but my point I'm making is and I would say with anybody, and I think all the major tier 1 contractors do it, you've got to have a plan and you've got to stick to that plan.
Engaging the stakeholders is key in that as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, and the stakeholder, especially on this project on King's Cross, Network Rail have been fantastic. The support that they've shown, with any health and safety initiative that we've done. The Achieving Excellence Plan, we also do a lot of, you have our analogy of 100% safe, and we'll come on to that in a sec as well. With various other zero harm and all the good, it's like visionary type strategies in it to an extent. We want zero harm, we want to be 100% safe. But yeah, I've always said to underpin that, you've got to have a strategy, you've got to have a plan. but don't have it over, I'm going to have a 5-year plan. You know, when the good thing that Morgan Sindel do, they'll review it every year. So achieving excellence, you set it out into quality, health and safety, various other stuff, but then after a year, measure it and turn around and say, right, what have we achieved? What haven't we achieved? What worked? What didn't work? Okay, do we want to then produce, or do we want to continue with this, or do we want to try something else? Or if it didn't work, do we reinvent it? And from that Achieving Excellence plan, it gives you a quarterly, a bit of a steer on what you do per quarter then, with regards to working at height or well-being. And we always split it down into environmental well-being and health and safety each quarter. And then you can then do workshops, briefings, any way you want to communicate that to the workforce. It gives you a good standing then. It gives you a good, you know, platform, shall I say, to then, you know, manage to an extent health and safety on your projects, but also it aligns you to the business because, again, each project is different. So you've got to align your own strategy to that strategy to an extent, but also you can do your own certain things. And that's where, again, stakeholder client engagement becomes massive, because some of the things that the client might want doesn't align to your own strategy. And so that's where we come in, where you've got to juggle it to an extent, and you've got to look at both. You've got to look at your own business unit, and you've got to look at your client and the project, and come up with sometimes a middleman, or sometimes a middle ground to compromise or to assure everybody. So that's one of the things I take away from it, is got to have a good strategy. And we also, as I've mentioned already about well-being, we train, we do self-training, so mental health first aiders. If you think of the construction industry a couple of years ago, could you get a 25-year-old supervisor wanting to come in and talk about his feelings and tell you that he's feeling stressed? But we've gave people the tools now to actually, you know, with mental health first aiders. I think it's a brilliant initiative, and I know it's not just...
It's one of the biggest changes in the industry as well, that it's so prevalent now to be able to speak up and be recognised, whereas in years gone by, it would have been cast to one side, or the person would have been cast to one side had they spoke up. But now it's excellent that we're in that position that we're able to support that and develop that through. So I think mental health first aiders absolutely agree.
It's fantastic. Yeah, it is a fantastic initiative. It's something that I know the whole industry is taking on board. And as I said, I think we still work to be done. You know, we've still got some guys out there, girls out there who don't want to speak up. But you've got to give them the tools. And it's not just about companies. It's also, you know, there are mechanisms for, you know, people to phone. There's things in the rail industry that we can, you know, you don't need to speak to company reps. You know, there is plenty out there for people to get in touch with people. I've personally, had, I would say, issues myself with regards to, I don't know if I'm PTSD. I would never say for me it was PTSD, but I know a lot of people that have suffered with PTSD, and I've tried to help out as much as I can. I do try my best to do a bit of fundraising. I've done stuff in the past with a guy called Andy Reid, who's a triple amputee. He's got a foundation called Standing Tall, and he does a lot of work with Morrisons and the railway, and he talks quite openly about it. But I remember I was doing him more of a motivational speaker, and you found that the more he spoke about his motivational speaker, he then started to suffer a bit more with PTSD because he started to remember it a lot. So you've got that thing. But yeah, I think PTSD is massive, and it still is. I think I didn't suffer from PTSD, but I'm quite willing to share that experience. I suffered a lot from, and it happens to a lot of ex-servicemen, I was you call it institutionalized for 20 years. I was programmed, I was in this bubble, shall I say, where I got out of the army, and nothing prepares you for getting out of the army into what we call Civvy Street. And I lost my marriage from it. Not proud to say that, but I did. I also suffered with depression quite a lot in my first 2 years of working for Balfour Beatty. Did I tell anybody about it? No. Yeah. And as I said to Blair, I took on 3 or 4 more roles. I think looking back, the reason I took on all these roles and this responsibility wasn't to get that, recognition. It wasn't because it was ingrained into me in the army that I'd take on roles. It was to hide the fact that I was suffering. And I just wanted, and I was working 19-hour days, mate. I was always on the phone. I was always working. I didn't speak to family. I didn't speak to friends. They got really concerned about me. And my excuse was, I'm working, I'm busy. And the penny dropped when, as I said, I'm going through a divorce. I'm depressed. And actually, looking back, if I had someone to talk to, I'm still one of these, mate. When somebody said you need to do counselling, I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm a squaddy, and I mean, I like squaddy. I'm not doing that. One of the best things I've done was talk about it, and you get a release. It's like that chip off your shoulder. It is something that I would recommend to anybody. You don't have to talk about a counsellor. You don't. And I didn't lie on a chaise lawn, mate, and going through that. It was, sitting having a good chat, and within 2 seconds, she had already sussed me out. She doesn't tell you what's wrong with you. You figure it out for yourself. But to enable you to talk to someone, that is, to me, a mental health first aider, or even just me. I like to grab people and I like to have a chat with them. I like everybody that works for me. I will always have a one-to-one with them every month. And we do PDRs, mate. We do, development records and various other stuff. It's not about that. It's about just sitting with you guys and girls and saying to them, how are you? I mean, are you all right? And recognise, as I keep saying, know your employees, because you can sort of recognise. I've done mental health first aid myself. You can see the signs. People go quiet, people work a lot, and the reason I can see the signs, I was in that boat. You know what I mean? And I suffered really badly for it. To the point, as I said, probably had a breakdown, but I masked that. And as we keep saying, the role now of talking mental health first aider or anybody at all, if you look at it from us in our realm of safety, it does quite sit with us to an extent. Well-being, and I'll cover that quite near the end. Is I wrote a list of what I do now as a health and safety practitioner. It's not just health and safety, well-being. It's you're a counsellor, you're security, there's loads that we become, not necessarily by choice, but because of the role itself, it develops, and that's what we have to do. So yeah, it's tough to go through, but as I said, the stuff that Morgan's done, the stuff that Balfour Beatty do, I've seen lots, because the good thing about being in a PC role, when you've got multiple contractors, you see what everybody else is doing. So again, Siemens, who work for us on the job, some of the stuff they're doing for development and soft skills approach is head and shoulders above anybody, because they're looking at the softer skills of stuff. So what makes people tick? It's not just about the core skills. It's about, how do I ask people? Things that Siemens are doing at the minute are possibly industry changing from a supervisor level. It's stuff that we should share. That's a good thing. We don't share enough. We don't have this big forum that we can all put good ideas on it and say, this is what we do better. And I like Balfour Beatty had a thing called Share with Pride. I would like to have a steal with pride. I mean, I would like to take everything, but I mean that in a bad way. I don't mean that in a bad way. I would like, and I think the Track Safety Alliance that is done through Network Rail, I think that's a very good way of doing that. And I'm a member of the Track Safety Alliance, and the guys who run that and the guys who are involved in that and girls who are involved in that, you get all the good practice from that. And I think we need to embrace that a lot more, not just within the railway, in construction, in the industry in general. If we share good practice, IOSH, and it's a fantastic way of doing it, mate. And we shouldn't be scared of people taking your ideas. You should take pride in the fact that somebody took your manual handling escalator idea and used it in another project and claimed it was their idea. Brilliant, go for it. I would do that, and I'll do it 100%. I will share anybody, and I'll take you to the COVID stuff that we've done. I don't know if you've stalked me on my profile, mate, on LinkedIn enough to look at the COVID stuff that we've done back in March, April time last year. I was more than happy to share. We brought in thermal camera imagery. And
And I think that was prevalent in the industry, wasn't it? That we shared when COVID hit, everybody started to share their ideas and really work together to put the information out there rather than working as a load of separate entities.
100%.
We're going to have to move on a little bit, Dave, and I'm going to thank you for coming on the podcast at this point, and thank you very much on behalf of the viewers and listeners to Safer Than Your Average for coming on the show.
Yeah, no problem, mate. It's been, well, I'm hoping that, you know, people have taken a bit from it, mate, and it's been glad, mate. It's been a good experience. Very good, mate. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very
Cheers.
much, mate. Cheers,
This podcast is sponsored by Inside Out Group, the specialists in high-risk and challenging filming and time-lapse, covering health and safety videos for rail, construction, and infrastructure projects nationwide.